Three-Horn the Dinosaur. Long, long ago, there lived a very ugly, very big, but very nice animal. This nice animal was a kind of dinosaur, but he didn't know that. And his real name was Triceratops. But he didn't know that either. All he knew was that he had three horns, and that even if he wasn't the biggest animal around, he also wasn't the smallest. He was just the right size for what he was and for what he did. There were other things Three-Horn knew. He knew which patch of grass tasted best, and which bush was good for dessert, and which tree had the most delicious leaves. He also knew that he didn't bother the other animals, and that most of them didn't bother him. He lived in peace because that's the way he was. Three-Horn lived in a time when there were no people, no houses, and no roads. All there was what he could see: water, fields, forests, the ocean, the volcanoes, and sometimes terrible storms. Three-Horn didn't do very much except look around, walk about, see what there was to see, and sometimes visit with some of the other animals that happened to cross his path. There were small furry things and big scaly things. There were flying things and swimming things, jumping things and huge noisy things. And they were all friends. They were especially Three-Horn's friends because he was stronger than most of them, and none of them would take the chance and fight him. Every morning when the sun came up, Three-Horn would wake up, sniff the air, and yawn. Then he would eat a little grass for breakfast and walk around in the warm sun and investigate this and that. He would swivel his head as he watched a flying thing whose real name was Pteranodon move gracefully through the air, swoop down and glide over the ocean. Three-Horn could see it dip its long beak into the water, snatch up a wiggling fish, gulp it down, and then flap its wings and fly away. The sight of the water would make Three-Horn thirsty, and so he would walk over to a lake. He moved slowly, walking over bushes and knocking down small trees, and all the time that he walked, he would listen and sniff the air and move his head from side to side, on the watch for the one animal that might mean trouble. This caution might seem funny for somebody as big as Three-Horn. Anything as long as a truck and as high as a small house shouldn't have had to be afraid. But there were animals around, even bigger than Three-Horn was. Down at the water, Three-Horn would dip his head and take a good, long drink. And when he finished, he would look out over the water for the swimming things. He could see a bird that couldn't fly, but could only swim. Its name was Western Bird. Three-Horn would watch that funny bird dip a fish out of the water and swallow it with one gulp. He could see Elasmosaurus, the long thing with its huge, graceful neck sticking up into the air, paddling around looking for fish or weeds, and making believe it was very ferocious. The long thing didn't fool anyone, except maybe the fish it happened to catch. could see Archelon, the flat one, as he pulled himself out of the water and onto the shore so that he could lie in the sun for a little bit. The flat one never moved too far away from the water. He was slow on the land, but in the water, he was a very fast swimmer. He had to be fast because he tasted very good, and he had many enemies who wanted to eat him. And so Three-Horn watched everything and smiled in his own way, a sort of wide grin that wrinkled his forehead and lifted his three horns. Then he snorted a laugh and turned and trotted away. He wasn't a water thing, and he had had enough of watching. He wanted to see what was going on in the great rolling fields and the deep forests on this fine sunny morning. Trotting up the small hill that led to the lake, Three-Horn stopped to watch the smoke rising from a distant volcano. Naturally, he didn't know what it was, but he knew that it was a long way away, and that it made a red glow at night, and that it wasn't anything he had to be afraid of. But it was interesting, so he just stood and watched it. Suddenly, the noises that he knew all stopped. The air became very quiet, too quiet. Three-Horn looked around. He didn't see any flying things, or walking things, or jumping things, or little running things. He knew something was going to happen. Carefully, he turned his head from side to side. And there it was, Tyrannosaurus Rex, the killer beast. At first, it had been hidden behind a huge clump of trees, but now it had moved into the open, the biggest animal of them all, taller than Three-Horn and twice as long. It stood on its hind legs, its front legs like hands with claws. It moved towards Three-Horn, its huge clawed feet trampling the grass and the ferns in its path. Three-Horn backed away. He was too slow to run, he knew that, and the big beast was hungry, he knew that. Three-Horn could hear its roars, and the roars meant only one thing. Three-Horn would have to fight the one animal he feared most in his whole world. The killer beast moved closer, and Three-Horn stood still. There was no place for him to go. He faced the enemy with his only weapons, his three horns pointed like three sharp swords. The killer beast tramped towards Three-Horn. Its feet shook the ground, and its huge tail whished across the grass. The killer moved around Three-Horn, trying to find a way past the sharp horns. But Three-Horn kept turning, always facing the hungry beast, always protecting himself. The killer darted in quickly. Three-Horn lowered his head. As the monster reared up, Three-Horn charged. He hit the killer beast with all his strength, and the killer beast moved back. The other animals left their hiding places to watch. They knew that the king of the beasts had lost his battle. He was hungry, but not hungry enough to fight Three-Horn anymore. The killer beast and Three-Horn glared at each other. Then the killer beast slowly moved away, back towards the safety of the deep forest behind him. Three-Horn stood where he was, waiting to make sure the killer was really leaving. When the killer beast disappeared into the forest, Three-Horn looked around. The sounds of the animals were back now, and those signals of safety told him he had won, and that all was well. Now that the fight was over, Three-Horn was hungry. He moved towards a clump of tasty-looking ferns. He sniffed the good smells of the grass and the flowers. It would be a good day after all.